The scripture for this afternoon is coming from Matthew chapter 5, verses 44-45. But I say to you, love your enemies, bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. For he makes his sun For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and on the unjust.
Thank you, brother, so much, and it's so good to be back together this afternoon to be able to worship our God in spirit and in truth. So grateful for all those who take part in leading various aspects of the congregation. Your leadership is so much encouraged, and so grateful to be able to see the development of the congregation and just to be able to see the timeless nature of the gospel and the way in which it spreads to every generation. So grateful for the work that we do here and to be able to be a part of that work. By the way, please keep in mind, Hannah and our older three, they will be traveling this upcoming weekend to Valdosta, Georgia, to the Forest Park congregation down there for Yes Weekend. And Hannah and I have been there before. We've been there actually before as counselors and have been involved in the work down there. It's been years upon years now, but now the kids are going to be going, and so look forward to that opportunity. And with Murphy being gone and all the older ones being gone, the Youth Devo next week is still on point as far as I know, and hopefully that can still play out the way that it does traditionally each month, and grateful for that opportunity and for the elders seeing that as a great way in which the young men can develop and continue to grow in the gospel and in their service. This afternoon we're looking at, again, a parallel between Joseph and Jesus, learning more about Jesus and getting ourselves ready to get into the ministry of Jesus. The book is called His Life, and we haven't even gotten to His life here on earth yet. But Jesus, being God, being eternal, obviously there are aspects and various traits that we want to study initially, which we've done, and now we're looking at the Old Testament and various characters in the Old Testament and how that study prepares one for then the work of Jesus, the life of Jesus, the fruition of the gospel, even as we saw in Joseph's account in particular, as Jesus then comes to do the purpose of God regarding the salvation of mankind. And so this afternoon we're looking at one piece of the life of Joseph and how that, again, translates and correlates to the life of Jesus and some of the work that he did, in particular feeding the multitude. And we're going to make that application regarding our own lives and the way in which we perceive serving other people and the temptation that we might have to, frankly, avoid serving other people. And think about that in terms of what Joseph did as well as what Jesus did, and hopefully be encouraged that no matter what it is we face concerning those who are able to be served by us, that we would do so appropriately and to the glory of God. And so let's start by looking at Genesis chapter 45. Genesis chapter 45, and here we're looking at again the life of Joseph and what it was that he was up against, what it was that he was doing. And we're going to then again transition to then look at Christ. But let's begin Genesis chapter 45, and notice with me there in verse 25. Genesis 45, beginning in verse 25. And they went up out of Egypt and came into the land of Canaan unto Jacob their father, and told him, saying, Joseph is yet alive, and he is governor over all the land of Egypt. And Jacob's heart fainted, for he believed them not. And they told him all the words of Joseph, which he had said unto them. And when he saw the wagons which Joseph had sent to carry him, the spirit of Jacob their father revived. And Israel said, It is enough, Joseph my son is yet alive. I will go and see him before I die. Then I want you to go over to Genesis chapter 50. Genesis chapter 50, and look with me here, beginning in verse 15. We're going to kind of start more toward the end and then work backwards. So Genesis chapter 50, notice beginning there in verse 15. It says, And when Joseph's brethren saw that their father was dead, They said, Joseph will peradventure hate us, and will certainly requite us all the evil which we did unto him. And they sent a messenger unto Joseph, saying, Thy father did command before he died, saying, So shall ye say unto Joseph, Forgive, I pray thee now, the trespass of thy brethren, and their sin, for they did unto thee evil. And now we pray thee, forgive the trespass of the servants of God, of the God of thy father. And Joseph wept when they spake unto him, and his brethren also went and fell down before his face, and they said, Behold, we be thy servants. And Joseph said unto them, Fear not, for am I in the place of God? But as for you, ye thought evil against me, but God meant it unto good, to bring to pass, as it is this day, to save much people alive. Now therefore fear ye not, I will nourish you and your little ones. And he comforted them and spake kindly unto them. And so here we see the response of Joseph as it relates to the brethren who betrayed him, as we studied this morning and we looked at this morning. I think I may have read the wrong passage earlier, but Genesis chapter 45, verses 3 through 8, we have a very similar situation and Joseph's response. If you notice there, verse 7, this is Joseph explaining this to his brethren when they first see what he's doing. And God sent me before you to preserve, this is verse 7 of Genesis 45, and God sent me before you to preserve you a posterity in the earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So now it was not you that sent me hither, but God, and he hath made me a father to Pharaoh, and Lord over all his house, and a ruler throughout all the land of Egypt. So let's just start there. Here's the deal. Joseph, having been betrayed by his brethren, having gone through all the difficulties that he went through, you think about Potiphar's wife, you think about being in prison, you think about the promises that were made to him, then not being answered until quite some time when all of a sudden they were remembered. Just Joseph had a difficult trek of things. And after all of that, here Joseph is now in a position of power. He could certainly power trip, and he could kind of point the finger and say, see, I told you so. Think about how easy it would be for Joseph here to say, remember that dream I had of the sheaves? Remember that dream I had of the moon and the stars and the sun? He doesn't do that. Joseph acknowledges the fact that he has suffered what he has suffered, and in actuality, throughout all of that, it's an opportunity now where he is to serve and do good unto others. And you think about Jesus, and you think about what Jesus went through. As Danny mentioned as he presided over the table this morning, Jesus here on the cross, being tempted, being threatened, being challenged. If you're really the Son of God, come down from there. But yet, what did Jesus do? Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Joseph had a very similar mentality. So let's start by looking at Joseph's family, knowing the affliction that was going to come to them prior to Joseph even going to Egypt. And so backtrack even more. Remember, they're in the midst of a famine when Joseph is saying what he's saying here in Genesis chapter 45. Joseph recalls that, by the way, in Genesis chapter 50 after Jacob had died. But prior to that famine even coming about, it was told to Joseph's family what would become of them concerning a foreign land. So look with me in Genesis 15 and notice here in verse 13. Genesis 15 and verse 13. And he said unto Abram, Know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years. And so now Joseph is in that land. And Joseph's family is now dependent on this land in order for survival, to live. Okay? And so Joseph, in the position that he's in, really has an opportunity here to basically destroy the very nation that's going to do them harm and do his ancestors harm. The Egyptians, however, were spared because of the work of Joseph. And not only that, think about really what this people was and who they were. What defined them? They were idolatrous. They were wicked. They opposed God. They opposed righteousness. They opposed morality. They opposed purity. And Joseph here is in a position as the future is laid before Pharaoh to be able to do whatever he wants to do. But he ends up making the decision to serve this people who are in deep need. Look with me in Genesis chapter 41. Genesis chapter 41, starting there in verse 25. And Joseph said unto Pharaoh, the dream of Pharaoh is one. Joseph here is now providing this dream and the interpretation of it to Pharaoh, because finally the chief butler remembers the prison and what Joseph was capable of. And so now Joseph has been called before Pharaoh. He says, hey, Pharaoh, the dream of Pharaoh is one. God has showed Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good kind are 7 years, and the 7 good years are 7 years. The dream is one. And the 7 thin and ill-favored kind that came up after them are 7 years. And the 7 empty ears blasted with the east wind shall be 7 years of famine. This is the thing which I have spoken unto Pharaoh. What God is about to do, he showeth unto Pharaoh. Behold, there come 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt, and all the famine shall consume the land, and the plenty shall not be known in the land by reason of that famine following, for it shall be very grievous. And so the Egyptians end up being spared because of the work and servitude of Joseph. Okay? Joseph spared life by feeding the multitude. Stay with me there in chapter 41 and look at verse 37. The thing was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of all his servants. And Pharaoh said unto his servants, can we find such a one as this is, a man in whom the Spirit of God is? And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, for as much as God hath showed thee all this, there is none so discreet and wise as thou art. Thou shalt be over my house, and according unto thy word shall all my people be ruled. Only in the throne will I be greater than thou. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, see, I have set thee over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh took off his ring from his hand, and put it upon Joseph's hand, and arrayed him in investitures of fine linen, and put a gold chain about his neck, and he made him to ride in the second chariot which he had. And they cried before him, bow the knee, and he made him ruler over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without thee shall no man lift up his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. Then drop down to verse 47, same chapter, verse 47. And in the 7 plenteous years the earth brought forth by handfuls, and he gathered up all the food of the 7 years which were in the land of Egypt, and laid up the food in the cities. The food of the field, which was round about every city, laid he up in the same. And Joseph gathered corn as the sand of the sea, very much, until he left numbering, for it was without number. Notice also, starting in verse 53, in the 7 years of plenteous that was in the land of Egypt were ended, and the 7 years of dearth began to come, according as Joseph had said. And the dearth was in all the lands, but in all the land of Egypt there was bread. And when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. And Pharaoh said unto all the Egyptians, go unto Joseph, what he saith to you, do. And the famine was over all the face of the earth, and Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold unto the Egyptians, and the famine waxed sore in the land of Egypt, and all countries came into Egypt to Joseph for to buy corn, because that the famine was so sore in all the land. So again, Joseph's family, Genesis 15 and verse 13, they're aware of what's going to come upon their ancestry. They're aware of the affliction. Joseph has every opportunity, given the power that he has, to sabotage the Egyptians, to siphon off resources for himself, for his family, to benefit his own life, while then destroying the lives of the Egyptians. But what side is Joseph on? Joseph is on the side of life. Joseph is going to choose servitude rather than choosing selfishness and betrayal. And so contemplate that, and then the life of Jesus. Number one, Jesus knew of the affliction that was going to come upon him. Look with me in Mark chapter 9. Mark chapter 9 and verse 31. Jesus knew what he was on earth to do and what was going to come upon him. Verse 31 of Mark chapter 9, Jesus teaches his disciples, he says to them, "The Son of Man is delivered into the hands of men, and they shall kill him, and after that he is killed, he shall rise the third day." And then you see in Luke chapter 24, and in verse 7, once again, what Jesus knew, the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men and be crucified, and the third day rise again. And so I have a question. Is it easy to serve and do good unto those that don't have your best interest in mind? That certainly don't care about what it is you have to say. That actually would be totally fine getting out of the way if you were going to be destroyed, and even themselves seeking your destruction. That would be a pretty difficult thing. But both Joseph and Jesus had a different type of mentality. They were willing to serve those, even those who sought their destruction. And we see this, of course, throughout the life of Jesus. We have several passages here to consider. Notice with me Mark chapter 14. Mark chapter 14, let's begin there in verse 13. Mark chapter 14, starting there in Matthew chapter 14. Matthew chapter 14, starting in verse 13. We have the 5,000 being fed. Jesus departs by ship into a desert place apart. And when the people had heard thereof, they followed him on foot out of the cities. And Jesus went forth and saw a great multitude, and was moved with compassion toward them, and he healed their sick. And when it was evening, his disciples came to him, saying, "This is a desert place, and the time is now past. Send the multitude away, that they may go into the villages and buy themselves victuals." But Jesus said unto them, "They need not depart. Give ye them to eat." And they said unto him, "We have here but 5 loaves and 2 fishes. He said, "Bring them hither to me." And he commanded the multitude to sit down on the grass, and took the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes, and looking up to heaven, he blessed and brake, and gave the loaves to his disciples, and the disciples to the multitude. And they did all eat and were filled, and they took up of the fragments that remained 12 baskets full. And they that had eaten were about 5,000 men, beside women and children. Notice also chapter 15, starting there in verse 29. Jesus departed from thence, and came nigh unto the Sea of Galilee, and went up to the mountain, and sat down there. And great multitudes came to him, having with them those that were lame, blind, dumb, maimed, and many others, and cast them down at Jesus' feet, and he healed them, insomuch that the multitude wondered when they saw the dumb to speak, the maimed to behold, the lame to walk, and the blind to see. And they glorified the God of Israel. And then Jesus called his disciples unto him, and said, "I have compassion on the multitude, because they continue with me now 3 days, and have nothing to eat. And I will not send them away fasting, lest they faint in the way." And his disciples said unto him, "Whence should we have so much bread in the wilderness, as to fill so great a multitude?" And Jesus said unto them, "How many loaves have ye?" And they said, 7, and a few little fishes. And he commanded the multitude to sit down on the ground. And he took the 7 loaves and the fishes, and gave thanks, and brake them, and gave to his disciples, and the disciples to the multitude. And they did eat and were filled. And they took up of the broken meat that was left 7 baskets full. And they that did eat were 4,000 men, beside women and children. And so this was the work of Jesus throughout his ministry. This was what Jesus did. He healed, he cared for, he loved, he allowed those that were in a condition of ailment, in a condition of being handicapped, to be made whole. And he fed those that were malnourished and that were in need of sustenance. And we find this as well in John chapter 6. Of course, Jesus always tying this to the eternal purpose. Notice verse 26. Jesus says, "Verily, verily, I say unto you, ye seek me not because ye saw the miracles, but because ye did eat of the loaves and were filled." And so, it's challenging to care for folks who have physical needs, to go then beyond that and then care for their spiritual needs. This chapter and what we find Jesus doing here, in some ways we can walk away and say, yeah, that's right, Jesus ought to have told them how it is, and kind of to stop being leeches. But in actuality, what we see being carried out here is tough love. We see care and tenderness and instruction relative to sacrifice and what's required that in many ways, if you think about folks today, they lack the love, the compassion, and the concern to actually go that far and explain to others what is actually required beyond just the physical necessities. It is easier to just give someone $20. Even give someone $20 over and over and over again. Even give someone hundreds of dollars over and over and over again. It's harder to say, hey, you know what? I'll help you again, but we need to have a study. We need to really open the Bible. We need to learn more about the gospel. We need to really think about your life and how we can help you for eternity. That's a harder conversation to have. That takes some discipline and some finesse where the truth is coupled with love so that kindly someone can be addressed regarding their concern for the physical and instead shifting it to the eternal. I've had several situations with this congregation here and been invited with the elders to go into meetings with folks who were in need and benevolence was being contemplated. And that very type of conversation is had. And almost in every instance, usually after that conversation takes place, we don't really see that individual any longer. And that's unfortunate. But that is the feeding of the multitude. That is the giving of the bread that matters beyond just the physical nourishment that our physical body requires. And Jesus indeed lays this out for them here in verse 26. And you see also verse 68, Peter understands this. He says, Lord, to whom shall we go? Thou hast the words of eternal life. Remember, many of the disciples left him after they heard this. We find it there in verse 66. They didn't want to walk with Jesus any longer after he explained what was required. Jesus says to the apostles, are you going to also go? Peter says, no, you have the words of eternal life. That's what we're here for. You also see Jesus explaining in verse 35 of this same chapter, I am the bread of life. He that cometh to me shall never hunger, and he that believeth on me shall never thirst. Now, in many ways, it could be thought, why even waste your time saying this? Why even present this truth and put it out there? They're not interested in any of these kinds of things. They just want the physical bread. But Jesus does it anyway. And we see there in verse 27, the primary takeaway, labor not for the meat which perisheth, but for that meat which endureth unto everlasting life, which the Son of Man shall give unto you. For him hath God the Father sealed. Jesus gave life by feeding the multitudes, not just physically, but spiritually as well. And so what is the application and contemplation for us? Well, perceiving that affliction is on the horizon can make it hard to give. We can want to shut our bowels of mercies. We can want to close our compassion down. We can want to lock up any room that we have for giving because we perceive it to be not useful or beneficial. We might contemplate it and see it in those instances as an investment in nothing. But God says, no, it's not an investment in nothing. It's an investment in Jesus. 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and verse 58, therefore, my beloved brethren, be steadfast, unmovable, always abounding. Notice, always, that means forever. Abounding, that means continual growth and development and in many ways like an explosiveness in the work of the Lord. Why and how is it that we can do this? For as much as you know that your labor is not in vain in the Lord. We might perceive it as an investment in nothing. The Bible tells us it's an investment in Jesus. And we likewise see that Jesus describes in Matthew chapter 25 concerning those that are cared for, those that are fed, those that are provided for. Jesus relates that to being cared for himself. Verse 34, beginning there, then shall the king say unto them on his right hand, come, ye blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was an hungered, and ye gave me meat. I was thirsty, and ye gave me drink. I was a stranger, and ye took me in. Naked, and ye clothed me. I was sick, and ye visited me. I was in prison, and ye came unto me. Then shall the righteous answer him, saying, Lord, when saw we thee an hungered, and fed thee, or thirsty, and gave thee drink? When saw we thee a stranger, and took thee in, or naked, and clothed thee? Or when saw we thee sick, or in prison, and came unto thee? And the king shall answer and say unto them, Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as ye have done it unto one of the least of these my brethren, ye have done it unto me. And so it's not an investment in nothing, it's an investment in Jesus. We might perceive affliction being on the horizon and it's difficult to give as a negative transaction. It's a negative transaction. In other words, there's no value attributed with what it is we're going to engage in. The outcome is going to be to my detriment. It's a negative. Well, think about what Jesus tells us regarding treasure in Matthew chapter 6. Verse 19 beginning says, Lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth, where moth and rust doth corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, and where thieves do not break through nor steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. We also see that Paul explains in Romans chapter 8 regarding the suffering that we might endure. He says there, Romans chapter 8, beginning in verse 36, we are counted as sheep for the slaughter. For thy sake we are killed all the day long. In other words, our suffering is for the betterment of the gospel if it is being done for the glory of God. But verse 37 says, Nay, in all these things we are more than conquerors through him that loved us. And so we might perceive it as a negative transaction. The reality is it's an eternal transaction. We are more than conquerors. We are doing it for the sake of God. We might perceive affliction being on the horizon. Why waste my time with this servitude? Why give to such individuals who have a disdain for God and who are not interested in the gospel? Why bestow my goods, bestow my efforts, bestow my energy, my time, my love, my concern, my words? Why do it? It's a personal loss. Maybe a personal loss, but it's an opportunity for a godly increase. Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 3 and in verse 6, I have planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the increase. Peter describes what it is that's being built up regarding our servitude to God. In verse 4 he says, To whom coming as unto a living stone, disallowed indeed of men, but chosen of God and precious, ye also as lively stones are built up a spiritual house and holy priesthood to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God by Jesus Christ. It might feel like a personal loss, but that personal loss is actually an opportunity for a godly increase, building up the church. What a blessing it is to see the account of Joseph, of him feeding the multitudes, of him feeding the very country that would bring about the affliction upon his ancestors and upon his people. Feeding also his very brethren who sought his destruction. But him knowing he had the opportunity to do good unto them and seeing the opportunity to serve and to preserve life. Jesus, of course, the same. So where do we stand this afternoon? How is our resources being managed and regulated by us? Is it free-flowing? Is it wide open? Is it eager to bestow and to give and to care? Hopefully it is, as we strive to be like our Father in heaven who sends the rain on the just and on the unjust. Maybe you're here this afternoon and you have closed up your barns. You've shut down your compassion and your eagerness to do good unto those who are in need. And you're ready to make a change. You need prayers of the congregation. Maybe you've fallen away and you're ready to be restored. We're here to help you in any way that we can. Maybe you're here, you're not yet a child of God. Won't you make the decision to become one? As we read about in Galatians chapter 3, 26 and 27 is done by putting on Christ via baptism, as we see exemplified in Acts 8, 34 through 39. If you have any spiritual need, won't you come forward as all together we stand and sing.